Welcome back to Oddtober, the yearly series of videos where we take a look at all things Oddworld. This time we're going to be taking a look at the third and final game in the series released for the Game Boy line of systems, with Oddworld Munch's Oddysee for the Game Boy Advance. The question is it better than its console counterpart, and how does it compare to the other Game Boy games in the series? Well, let's pop it in and take a look. Upon starting the game up, it actually doesn't give a particularly great first impression. The title screen is a bit boring, just having a green background with a pixely version of the game's logo, and upon getting to the main menu, things don't get much better. We have a static picture of Munch's face in the background, which to be fair, looks okay quality-wise, but the fact it isn't animated makes it look a bit cheap. The GameSpeak option here has taken a massive nosedive in quality too, not only being completely unanimated, but not even letting us hear the sound effects of Abe and Munch talking when we press button combinations. It's literally just a screen displaying the GameSpeak controls, rather than being an interactive tutorial like it was in the earlier games. Even the earlier Game Boy games had more effort put into them than this, and they were on far inferior hardware, so there's no excuse here. Still, maybe the actual game will make up for this lack of attention to detail in the menus. The cutscenes in the game are once again static pixely still images with scrolling text explaining what's happening. This isn't too uncommon for a Game Boy Advance title, and the picture quality here is pretty good, and I would say the game generally does a good job explaining what's going on. Rather than directly retelling the events of the console Munch's Oddysee though, the portable version takes a ton of liberties with the story, and while it follows most of the same beats, it kinda does its own thing for a lot of the time. For example, in this beginning cutscene we don't get an introduction to Munch's character, and he's already established as being a friend of Abe's. Just like the console version of the game, we're also randomly expected to accept that this big raisin is seemingly in charge of Abe and the other Mudokons now, and gives Munch and Abe the task of shutting down a nearby Gluckin facility called Even Worst Wiener's Company. This facility is supposedly corrupting the land around a Mudokon settlement known as Breakwind Hill. You're told that by breaking into the facility, you'll be led to the hidden vault of Fort Glocks, and by liberating the wealth there, the Gluckons will leave the area and allow the Mudokons to prosper. This is the entire plot of the game, meaning that a ton of locations from the console version are cut here, and several important elements of the story, such as bankrupting all of the Gluckons in the area in order to make one mega rich Gluckon that they can easily manipulate, no longer happens. It's a much more simple story with far fewer thematic elements, but to be honest, it creates a game with a much easier to understand focus, and plus, it means the game is significantly shorter too. The game then actually begins, and instantly we have several elements taken from the console version of the game. For starters, the game is now semi-3D, giving us this top-down angle where we can move in 8 directions by using the D-pad. There's also a bigger focus on collectibles, with Abe requiring Spoos to activate his possession ability and to unlock doors to progress through the levels. We can also switch characters and start playing as Munch, who is able to swim, interact with mechanical contraptions, and communicate with Fuzzles by using his own version of GameSpeak. Abe, meanwhile, has his own set of skills, being much faster than Munch, he can talk to Mudokons, and of course he can control organic creatures. This gives both characters strengths and weaknesses that you'll need to take advantage of to navigate through the levels. An interesting element of this game is that despite using the name Munch's Oddysee rather than being called Oddworld Adventures 3 or something else entirely, this port is actually drastically different to its console counterpart, much more so than the 2 previous games we've covered. Whereas Oddworld Adventures 1 and 2 were demakes of Abe's Oddysee and Abe's Exodus, which used the same level designs and retold the same story as faithfully as they could, The Game Boy Advance version of Munch's Oddysee uses none of the same level designs as the console version and is its own game entirely. It simply uses some of the same mechanics and features that the console version introduced to the series. So really, this is a bit confusing because you would think that this would be a straight up port of the console game, with it sharing the same name, but in reality it's the most different Game Boy port we've seen in the series. Unfortunately, one of the elements this game did take from the console version is the amount of boring busy work you'll be doing here. The Mudokons following Abe are incapable of jumping and can't fall off of ledges on their own either, which means that in order to get them around the levels, you're going to be needing to pick them up one by one and then throw them to navigate your way around. This is such a pain and is a needlessly finicky mechanic that adds nothing to the game apart from wasting your time. Why couldn't they have just made it so Mudokons could follow you if you jump into a well or fall from a ledge? It just extends the game's length by constantly having you babysit every Mudokon, and it's not fun. What makes this even worse than in the console version of the game is that almost every action you do with these Mudokons restarts the background music. Literally every time you pick one up, it restarts, and then every single time you throw them, it restarts again. Why the hell does it do this? It's not even just talking to Mudokons that'll reset the music either. Even something as simple as moving onto a new screen within the same level will also reset it, and it just makes the whole game feel janky. It's a shame too, because I actually really like the music here. It's much less ambient than in the console version of Munch's Oddysee, and it fits the tone of Oddworld pretty well. So that just makes it even more stupid that they ruined it by having it constantly restart like this. A lot of the game's downfalls are the exact same ones from the console version of the game, to be honest, so I guess a lot of this stuff isn't exactly this game's fault, but rather it's an extension of the negatives of the original console game. For example, one of the things I hate is how watered down the enemies are. They all function exactly the same as each other and don't feel like actual creatures, but rather just skins of the same enemy. From a visual standpoint, there's actually quite a few enemy types here. We've got Vikers, Sligs, Slogs, Paramites and Big Bro Sligs, but they all just mindlessly run at you and attempt to hit you to death with a close ranged attack. Like what happened to Paramites only attacking you when there was two of them or they were backed up against a wall? The intricacies of the creatures are just forgotten about here, and it's disappointing seeing the series get watered down like this. It just ends up feeling like a conventional, bland video game, rather than feeling like you're exploring a living, breathing world like the original games did. Another thing I didn't like that was taken from the console version of the game is the constant interruptions from the tutorial Mudokon. But to be honest, this is nowhere near as bad as it is in the console version of the game, and the reasons for this is that firstly you can tell what the tutorial Mudokon is saying thanks to the fact that there's text on the screen rather than having spoken dialogue that's drowned out by all of the background noise. Secondly, there's nowhere near as many interruptions here as there is in the console version. And thirdly, I liked this bit where they bring attention to the fact that the tutorial Mudokon is capable of teleportation and could just help them to stop the Glukkons by using his powers. But he basically just chooses not to because it's a video game. This would have been a bit annoying in the actual console version, because I don't want Oddworld to be making itself feel too video gamey by doing stuff like breaking the fourth wall all the time. But here in the handheld version of the game, it kinda just feels like it's poking fun at the console version of the game for having this tutorial Mudokon in the first place. While a lot of these issues are taken from the console version of the Game Boy Advance version does actually introduce some brand new problems of its own. Firstly, just like Oddworld Adventures 2, there's no quick save here. This is a little bit annoying considering that if a Madokan or Fuzzle dies, you have no way of getting them back without completely restarting the level. But in its defense, this game is nowhere near as difficult as Oddworld Adventures 2, so you most likely won't need the quick save anyway. What isn't excusable though is that Munch's Oddysee for the Game Boy Advance uses password saving rather than just saving the game to the cartridge like most other Game Boy Advance games would. Seriously, the Pokemon games had a proper save feature all the way back on the original Game Boy, and yet here, Oddworld is still using passwords on hardware much more powerful where this wasn't necessary. It's not a game-breaking issue because it's easy to just jot down the passwords if you want to take a break and come back later, but still, it's another thing that makes the game lack polish. Easily the biggest issue with this game are aspects of its level design, but at the same time, this is also its biggest strength too. Let me explain. The level design here mostly consists of having these reasonably large areas to explore, with you opening up new areas by finding switches or by unlocking doors by collecting spoofs. You also find hidden areas with Madokans or Fuzzles, which need to either be used to attack enemies or can be used to activate contraptions to allow you to progress forward even more. The issue is that at times, the levels get a little bit too large and maze-like, and it's difficult working out exactly where you're supposed to be going. This wouldn't be too big of an issue, but the game overly relies on this one level type, having several maze levels all in a row, and it begins to feel a bit tedious by the end. Luckily, this is mostly a problem that only exists for the middle section of the game, with the beginning levels being much smaller and simpler, and the ending levels being more focused on platforming or combat, which mixes things up a good amount. But still, it did become a little bit of a drag in the middle section. There's also issues with the consistency in certain levels. Like for example, sometimes in order to end a level, you need to get Abe and Munch to both stand on specific platforms that have their faces on. That's easy to understand and it makes sense, but then for some levels there isn't an ending pad at all and you only need one character to reach a certain point. Sometimes there will be ending pads, but they won't have Abe or Munch's faces on, and then sometimes there won't be an ending pad and you'll need both Abe and Munch to be in a certain area to end the level. It's really weird how they couldn't just decide on one consistent level ending goal to make things easy to understand. This actually led to me finishing a level and not knowing it was the end. Then I went back to explore the entire level all over again because I didn't know I needed both of the characters to be standing in this particular room. Another annoying detail is that unlike in the main game, you can't get the other playable character to follow you so you can move them both at the same time. This results in basically having to play through every level twice, once properly to find all of the secrets and reach the end by clearing all of the obstacles, and then again just to get the other character to the end as well. To be fair, this isn't too bad most of the time because you'll obviously be using both characters to take advantage of the different abilities, but there were moments where I wished you could have just moved them both at the same time. The last element of the game I found really weird was how there's many times where you need a certain amount of spoofs to unlock a door, but you need to be a particular character to reach the lock to put the spoofs into. The issue of course is that the spoofs isn't shared across both characters, so if you've collected it all as Abe but you need to reach the lock with Munch, you're not gonna have enough to do it because Abe can't give Munch his spoofs. Luckily the game offers a workaround for this by enabling you to chant as Abe to regrow spoofs, which Munch can then collect, but this just feels like you're not playing the game properly and you're cheesing your way through it. Like, what was the point in me even collecting all of the spoofs in the first place if I was just gonna stand there and regrow it over and over again anyway? I might as well have just done that at the beginning of the level and then had enough spoofs to get through the entire thing without even collecting anything. The solution to this situation is so obvious as well. Just make the spoof total shared across both characters, and this literally wouldn't be a problem. I don't get why they made the choice to separate it like this, and again, it just feels like they wanted to waste your time. While I've been going on about all of the issues with this game for quite a while now, what I will say is that none of these issues are actually all that bad. By far the worst thing about it is that it relies a little bit too heavily on maze-like level design, but that's pretty much the worst it gets. So now, the question is, what does the game actually do well? Well, as I said before, despite the level design being the game's biggest weakness, it's also probably its biggest strength too. It actually has some really interesting puzzles where you need to use Munch to move a platform which Abe is standing on to get to new areas, and then work out how to get Munch across as well. The whole character switching mechanic is actually used to great effect here, and I found that both Abe and Munch were fun to use in their own ways. Taking control of the snoozer as Munch and shooting down your enemies gave an awesome temporary power trip before going back to feeling underpowered as Munch again. Platforming around as Abe is pretty fun, and being able to run quickly around enemies always felt pretty good too. I had a fun time playing as both characters, and the level design actually had me scratching my head for a minute trying to work out how to progress. That isn't the game's only strength though, because the graphics are also pretty great too. Having lots of differently themed areas with their own distinct colours and identity, and this is actually something that this game does better than the console version, with that version of the game reusing the same assets constantly, which ended up making no area feel unique. I think what helps the Game Boy Advance version of the game is that with the story being much more streamlined, it's also a lot shorter, so it was able to make its smaller number of areas more interesting to look at. Once again, there's good attention to detail in the backgrounds too, with us seeing Abe's wanted poster and other signs dotted around, and even the characters' models look pretty good. They did a good job of making the game look 3D, despite not actually being a fully 3D game, and visually, it definitely gets a thumbs up from me. An interesting lore detail provided by this game is that apparently whenever Abe possesses a creature, he can taste what that creature has eaten. This is shown by him making a comment about this after he's possessed a Glukkon. So, does that mean whenever he's possessed a Paramite and killed a Fleech, he's actually been able to taste what that Fleech would be like? That's kinda gross, and it makes me feel sorry for what we've put him through in all of the previous games. The game ends with Abe and Munch breaking into Fort Glocks and gaining entry to a secret vault by possessing a Glukkon, and then being able to steal a load of golden eggs, which forces the Glukkons to leave the area because there's no longer anything of any worth there. Whether these golden eggs are supposed to be Gabbit eggs, I'm not sure. It's never said that Munch is even looking for Gabbit eggs in this game, and to be honest, thinking about it now, you probably could make a good case for this game being a sequel to the console version of Munch's Oddysee. That would explain why Abe and Munch already know each other, and why you don't visit the same locations as in the console game, and why Munch isn't looking for Gabbits. But if that is the case, it's not directly made clear in the cutscenes, but it is an interesting concept. Rather than getting a different ending depending on the amount of rescues you have, you instead get given a rank at the end, and depending on what you get, you might be given a special password to enter on the main menu. This secret password unlocks a new option on the menu, which turns out to be a music player. This is actually a pretty decent completion reward. In concept, it's similar to the cutscene viewers that you unlock in Abe's Oddysee and Exodus for getting 100%, and I'm happy to see you actually get something for going to the trouble of rescuing everyone here. You even get to listen to all of the different sound effects used in the game too, which is a nice extra. I feel like I've come out of the experience of the Game Boy Advance port of Munch's Oddysee quite positively. Despite its several shortcomings, it's actually quite a decent game. Nothing mind-blowing, but it's alright. I'm putting Munch's Oddysee for the Game Boy Advance in 4th place in my series ranking. That's right, not only do I think it's better than the 2 previous handheld entries, but I also think it's better than the console version of Munch's Oddysee. Don't get me wrong, I don't think the GBA port of Munch's Oddysee is the second coming of Christ or anything, but it's good. Which is more than what I can say about the console version. To be honest, I actually think that if this game had done its own thing even more than what it already did, and distanced itself even more from the console Munch's Oddysee, it probably would have been even better. But unfortunately, because it uses some of the ideas that the console version had that weren't very good, like having to constantly pick up and ferry Madoccans around one by one, it's stopped from becoming anything better than just alright. What might have pushed the game a little bit further up in my opinion is if it would have had some kind of co-op multiplayer mode where one player controls Abe and another player controls Munch. I feel like that would have actually worked really well with this game and improved the pace of it quite a lot too, so it's a shame this wasn't implemented. What it boils down to is that Munch's Oddysee for the Game Boy Advance is not quite as flawed as the console version, which was tedious, far too long, and ruined several key elements of what made the original PS1 games so good. And it's also not as flawed as Oddworld Adventures 1 and 2, which lacked quick save, were far too difficult at times, and at the end of the day were basically just much worse versions of their console brothers. While Munch's Oddysee for the Game Boy Advance lacks ambition, it is different to the console version, which gives it a lot more value than simply being a weird demake, and I do appreciate some of the improvements that this makes over the console version, like the variety in levels and the shorter length. It's nowhere near a masterpiece, but it's also not a bad game either. And that's Oddworld Munch's Oddysee for the Game Boy Advance. Unlike the other games we've talked about this Oddtober, I would actually kinda recommend that you check this one out if it looks interesting to you. Just don't go into it expecting an amazing hidden gem or anything, and you might find yourself having a good time. Next week we're going to be taking a look at the first and currently only remake the series has seen. That is until Oddworld Soulstorm comes out. That's right, we're finally taking a look at Oddworld New and Tasty, which is a ground-up remake of Oddworld Abe's Oddysee, which is available on the PS4, PC, Xbox One, and practically every modern console you can think of. Next week it even comes out on the Switch, so if you want to get your hands on it, now's a good time to do so. Until then though, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe to see more stuff like this coming soon, and leave a comment down below letting me know what your favourite Oddworld game released on the Game Boy is. And, until next time, bye!